We did 2 very expensive emotional rounds of IVF, and both of them, we got 0 viable embryos. And it was kind of like, now what? And it was during the IVF process that I actually interviewed Dr. Jack Cruz. I was given that opportunity. And he is the one I've only had one conversation with Dr. Cruz. That was the one and only. And I went on a different path after speaking with him, of studying with a lot of different people and understanding it through this other lens. But he did put me on this path of like, you need to understand. He told me you need to understand leptin, circadian biology, quantum biology, and how your mitochondria work. These are going to be the keys for you in getting and staying pregnant. There's a lot of talk about peptides, MTHFR, hormones, red light therapy, cold therapy, diet. And what it comes down to in a lot of these conversations is that it's either good or it's bad, that there is one particular formula that's going to work for everyone. And if you're a human being living on the earth these days, you know that's not true. And if you're like me and work with a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds, with a lot of different health scenarios, you know firsthand that what might work beautifully for one person could be a complete disaster for the other. So today I have my friend and returning guest, Cash Khan, back on the show to talk about this and to talk about peptides, hormones, cold therapy, diet, the MTHFR, all of these things that there's a lot of nuance missing in the conversation. Now, if this conversation resonates with you and you want to learn more, we are having a free webinar on February the 11th. And I'm going to put a link down in the show notes for you. So if you want to come to that, you're welcome to join us. We'd love to have you, and you can ask questions of Cash. I'll be there as well. But he's going to be the one answering a lot of the questions when it comes to this bio-individual approach and understanding what works, what doesn't work, why NAD or glutathione or even a GLP-1 might be a bad idea for you or a good idea. So I hope you enjoy today's episode. Of course, none of this is medical advice. It is just for informational purposes only, but I hope that you enjoy it. Welcome to the Evolving Wellness Podcast, where circadian biology and quantum biology meet nutrition, lifestyle, hormones, health, and everyday conversations. I'm your host, Sarah, board certified in applied quantum biology by the American Naturopathic Medical Board and certified in nutrition by the National Academy of Sports Medicine. This is just a quick little reminder that you'll never hear a guest on this podcast whose every stance I agree with. And that's the point. These are conversations and not consultations. The information shared here is for information and educational purposes only, and is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the guidance of a qualified, trusted professional for all of your personal health needs. If you want more of my content, including my free long-form articles with citations, free ebooks, membership group with more access to me and my Circadian app that helps you integrate light into your life seamlessly, make sure to visit www.sarahkleinerwellness.com. Thank you so much for listening and enjoy the podcast.
Sarah, thanks for joining me on the Uncommon Living podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to chat with you.
Well, we met in Tennessee at Oksana Hansen's return to nature, even though we've sort of known one another for a few years through ice baths and metabolism. And what I didn't appreciate when I met you is how much you've been working on your own metabolism and the reasons why. I think this is super important to share with our audience because ever since Stacey Sims made the rounds on some of the most popular podcasts in the world saying, well, ice baths aren't very good for women and they should really be careful with ketosis, and saying a lot of things that contradict the experience of women who have been doing ice baths and going in and out of keto and changing their lives with metabolic interventions. I thought maybe it's time to hear from some of those women like you. Will you tell us about what you've learned about yourself?
Yeah, I love this conversation because we miss nuance in these large podcasts and the sound bites and what's popular. And I think we need to have these conversations. So again, I thank you for having me here. But, my own health journey has taught me so much. And then I've also been working with people for about the last 15 years in some capacity. Of the last probably 6 years, 5 years has been more so in the circadian biology, metabolic flexibility type of a scope. But before that, even I was doing health coaching and just kind of figuring out my own health. And I come from a long line of diabetic, overweight, metabolically kind of compromised individuals, was overweight for most of my life. I lost 100 pounds three separate
Wow.
times, and I just struggled, and I've done genetic testing. If I don't know how much you buy into that, but I have multiple markers genetically for obesity, diabetes, heart disease, just you name it. So the cards are definitely stacked against me. And I started this world of kind of metabolic intervention by way of the carnivore diet. And at first, it was amazing. It worked really well. And then there was the whole issue of metabolic downregulation and starting to see a lot of those hormones flatlining and trying to get pregnant and realizing that that was not an optimal diet for fertility if you've been, for long term. So we'll talk about flexing in and out of ketosis and that sort of thing, because I do think there can be a useful intervention for it, but it depends on the terrain of the person. So I had been doing carnivore for 2 years, which I think for most women is not going to be advisable. It's something that you want to kind of get in and get out of as needed. And I started to see some metabolic downregulation. So I was trying to get pregnant. I had my first pregnancy loss, and I was like, maybe there's more to metabolic health than diet and then just like the carnivore diet. Maybe there's more to it. That's what led
At
me
what age were
into
you when you lost your first pregnancy?
41. So I was,
Okay.
they'll tell, and that's what the doctors say. This is
They will call you
normal.
geriatric. Maybe they
Yeah.
don't do that anymore. Maybe they don't
Oh
use
no,
that
they
word,
do.
but geriatric pregnancy. It's not like you're getting mail from AARP or a discount bus card or something. 41 is not geriatric. But in the
Yeah.
United States, the decline in metabolic health and mitochondrial function is so rapid in men and women that typically by 41, a gynecologist would consider a woman high risk.
Oh
And
yes.
that must have been the way that they were looking at you. And so I'm
Hmm.
sorry for the interruption. You're on a roll with your medical journey, and I'm very curious about what you did as a 41-year-old woman wanting to get pregnant again and preparing your body for it.
Yeah. I mean, I knew I wanted to have another baby. I had waited a long time to have this second baby, and I thought that I was doing everything right, had eliminated, all the toxic skincare, hair care, home care, all the products, that cause a hormonal burden and endocrine disruptors, got rid of those. I had been eating a carnivore diet, which, I thought was the cleanest, healthiest diet. So I had done a lot of things to get my body what I thought was prepared for pregnancy. But I had never really heard of this concept of working on the mitochondria and mitochondrial health and how mitochondria impact egg quality, and sperm quality as well. And, the hormone leptin as well, and how that impacts our fertility. And it can be too high, it can be too low. We can lose the ability to have leptin signaling to the brain, and all of those things all impact your fertility. And I had 2 pregnancy losses, and the doctors were like, well, maybe it's time for you to go to reproductive endocrinology. And I said, fine, I'm desperate enough to do this. I don't want to keep having these pregnancy losses because they're very difficult. I never
Yeah.
really understood how sad it was to go through pregnancy loss I don't think you can until you go through it really. And I was at this place, I'm like, well, you know what? Let's just cash money out of our retirement and start the process of IVF, because at least, they can make sure that the eggs are healthy and this, that, and the other. And it'll be more of a sure thing, which it was not. We did 2 very expensive emotional rounds of IVF, and both of them we got 0 viable embryos. And it was kind of like now what? And it was during the IVF process that I actually interviewed Dr. Jack Cruz. I was given that opportunity. And he is the one I've only had one conversation with Dr. Cruz. That was the one and only. And I went on a different path after speaking with him of studying with a lot of different people and understanding it through this other lens. But he did put me on this path of like, you need to understand. He told me you need to understand leptin, circadian biology, quantum biology, and how your mitochondria work. These are going to be the keys for you in getting and staying pregnant. And so, again, that really put me down this rabbit hole, studying with the Quantum Biology Collective, going through their program, levels 1 and 2, getting the board certification, and really just diving into this stuff. And along that path, someone who actually was a coach that is in kind of Jack's group, he told me, you're an H2 haplotype, which means I'm a northern haplotype. You need to be getting cold along in this. And I was like, no, I don't want to do the cold plunges. I really don't want to. He said, this is
Nobody
how.
wants to do the cold plunges.
No.
Joe Rogan doesn't want to do the cold plunges. Professor Seager doesn't want to do the cold plunges. I don't know anybody who wants to do the cold plunges.
I just looked at him. I was like, you're crazy. And then, you have the other voices in your head, which this was 2021. Those voices were not so loud as they are now. I don't think cold plunging was as popular back then as it is now. And so, but you did have some voices just kind of saying, Chinese medicine says you need to keep yourself warm and nourished, and cold plunging is going to really disrupt your hormones and cause an issue. And, but I was at this point again where I'm like, you know what? What do I have to lose at this point? So I bought a tub from Amazon. It was like $60. And I would go to the grocery store and just load my cart up with ice. And they were always so confused. They're like, are you having a party? Like, what are you doing with all this ice? I'm like, I'm going to take an ice bath.
You said I'm trying to get pregnant, obviously. What are you even asking me for?
This is my... duh. So they were always so confused at the grocery store. But I said, well, I really don't have anything to lose. And I think I did my first plunge at like 60 degrees for 5 minutes. And gradually increased the temperature. And I played around with it a lot. So I did learn that there is kind of this upside down U-shaped curve for women and for myself also, where, 1 month I did too much cold plunging, temperatures were too low, times were too long, and I ended up creating a cycle disruption. So I course corrected the next 2 months. And then it was that January that I actually got pregnant with my son. So it didn't take a long time. It was really about 3 months of consistent cold plunging. And that first month, like I said, I'm a more is better, longer, lower temperatures, that's my personality. I tend to dive, feet first and just do the whole thing. And again, realized that was too much. And I found a better rhythm for me with more moderate, probably I went between, 35, 45 degrees. And I did anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes and did that 3 days a week. And like I said, pregnant that January after 2 miscarriages, 2 failed rounds of IVF, and, a couple years of trying unsuccessfully. And James is now...
How old were you when you succeeded?
I was 42 when I got the positive pregnancy test, and 43 when I gave birth that October, because my birthday's in June.
Sarah, how's your son?
He's amazing. He's 3 and he's wild. You saw the video of him the other day jumping in the cold plunge.
That's right. He's taking after his mom. You've got a healthy, energetic, wonderful boy. And I don't know you well enough to know, so I'm going to make a guess. And you're going to slap me and say, no, that's wrong. But this is your second child. And your first child is autistic. And there must have been some anxiety that you and your husband shared right up to the moment that your son was born, even after. Will you tell us about him and his intellectual, his neurological development, so that we can sort of reassure the audience that knows you and might have been riding that anxiety with you?
Well, it's kind of a long explanation, I guess, if you'll bear with me. But with my daughter, she is 18 now and she has non speaking autism. This occurred after a round of flu vaccine, which I don't know if you can say that on your show if you get censored, but she was a typically developing baby. We had that flu vaccine and she had a huge regression. And so I had always kind of in my heart that said, if I have another baby, I will not be doing that. And I also, raising her was very difficult. I never planned on having another one because it was so hard. And it is still hard. It's very hard. She's going to live with us forever. It's a challenge, which is another reason why I am so psychotic about my own health, because I don't have a plan for her when we're gone. I really need to be the healthiest, strongest, sharpest version of myself for these children. But I had not planned on having another one. And I know this might be a little odd for some people listening, but I went to see a medium in 2016 because I was hoping to reconnect with my dad, who had passed when I was really young. And a little boy came into the session, and a little boy was jumping up and down and saying, "Mom, I'm healthy. I'm healthy, and you can bring me here and you don't have to worry about anything. I'm going to be very healthy. Just know that if you want to bring me here, you can." And I just kind of like tucked that away. That was 2016. And then it wasn't until 2020 that I was like, you know what? I couldn't let that go. I just couldn't get it out of my head. So that's when we started trying. But I had already, when I decided to get pregnant, I had already in my heart just said, he's going to be fine. He already told me he's going to be fine. And I kind of repeated that through my pregnancy and beyond. And it was my husband really who he has struggled with, my son, to just be like, okay, is he on all the milestones? Is he doing all the things? And he has always been right on point, actually ahead of a lot of the kids that are his same age. And so, that has been, I would say, more of a challenge for my husband. Like me in my heart, I just had this knowing that he was going to be fine, especially when I found out it was a boy. The crazy thing is when we did have the pregnancy losses, we always tested the embryos to see, was it an abnormal embryo? Was there a genetic abnormality? And when you do that, you can see, is it a boy or a girl? Both of those were girls. And then when we did the IVF, we got embryos, but they were all genetically abnormal. They were all girls, all of them. And so that kind of kept me going also. It's like, well, he's not here yet. He's coming though. So it's that's a little bit of a woo-woo explanation
No,
to
that's
your
still great.
question. But if you're not new to my work, you already know the importance of sunlight in your daily life. But what if you have to work in an office all day long? How can you offset some of that blue light? Now, the work of Professor Glenn Jeffrey shows that preconditioning your body with red and infrared light before going into a blue lit environment actually helps your mitochondria buffer the stress of that environment. And I would recommend anyone who works in an office or has to be indoors a lot this winter to have a source of red and infrared on their desk with them. That is why I absolutely love this Bond Charge mini red light panel. And I keep it here on my desk while I'm working in my office and recording videos for you guys. And they've given me a discount for all of my listeners. All you have to do is go to the Bond Charge website, which I'll put down in the show notes for you, and use the code Sarah Kleiner for everything on the site. You can get 15% off. But if you want to get this little Bond Charge red light mini panel, this is really my favorite tool for anybody who has to work in an office and has to offset some of this blue light, because let's be realistic. We can't just quit our jobs and move, even though we might want to. So learning how to live in the modern world and mitigate it is going to be extremely helpful. And the research is there to show that red and infrared light is immensely helpful if you're in a blue lit environment. Head to bondcharge.com and check out the mini red light panel. Use the code Sarah Kleiner, all one word, to save 15% off. There will be a link down in the show notes. Yeah.
And I can understand why your husband would have doubt. I've experienced an analogous shock to my own system. When my son was 6 years old and he was diagnosed with diabetes, I felt shame. I felt inadequate. I felt like a failure as a father. I didn't know what was going on with him, and the feeling of ignorance and helplessness scared the hell out of me. He also has a younger sister. And when we measured his blood sugar after eating an Oreo cookie, by the way, there is no amount of insulin you can give a child diabetic that will prevent a blood sugar spike from an Oreo cookie. And so we saw in him the effects on his body. And of course, I began to think about my daughter differently, because the exact same thing is happening in her, or the exact same thing is happening in me. So the anxiety that your husband might feel as he's hitting his milestones, I can relate to. And he's doing great, at least from what I've seen on Instagram, as you always knew he would. And
yeah, he's doing very well.
You brought up a lot of things that, if you'll pardon me, I want to go back and touch on several of them. Chinese medicine. This is making the rounds on Instagram, and we hear a lot from people who are not Chinese telling us about Chinese medicine. And I'm not Chinese, and I don't know anything about it, except that it's often preceded by the modifier ancient. We're not talking about Chinese medicine that emerged since the discovery of brown fat in adult human beings. We're talking about Chinese medicine that predates central heat, that predates heated leather seats, that predates SUVs, that predates triple pane, glazed windows that cut us off from infrared. We're talking about practices or aphorisms. We're talking about a wisdom that was meant for an age that predated our technological existence. Cold, uninterrupted, chronic cold is terrible, and it's dangerous, and it does not promote fertility. And so when you hear, ancient Chinese medicine says, keep your womb warm, you have to imagine ancient Chinese women struggling in the rice paddies without all the comforts that we have today. What you did really well was back off on your cold exposure. You said, I'm going 35 to 45 degrees. I'm going to do 2 to 5 minutes. That's it. You've done plenty. There are a lot of people, some call them gym bros. They'll follow me on Instagram and they'll say, well, more is better. And that is just not the case, especially I'll be 60 this year. And I'm not at an age where I need to prove anything to myself in the gym. Maybe in the library, but not in the gym. More is not better. You get, an hour of exercise a week. You're doing great. You're doing better than 95% of the people in America. You get 2 to 5 minutes of cold plunge, 3-4 times a week. You are doing better than 90% of the people in America. You referred to the upside down U, which is the classic hormetic curve. If you don't get enough, you suffer. When you get the right amount, you do great. But when you do too much, you suffer again. And to go back to Stacy Sims, she trains women to run like triple marathons, to do incredible, extreme feats. And I must defer to her expertise in this regard. If you're trying to run a triple marathon, you should absolutely take Stacy Sims' advice. If you're trying to get pregnant at the age of 42, you should be getting into your ice bath. 2-3 minutes, do it as many times as you like until you think you're at ovulation. And when that happens, your immune system doesn't need the extra boost. Give yourself 3 or 4 days. If there's a fertile egg, if there's a zygote inside your system, you want it to implant in the walls of the uterus. You don't need any extra immune activity during that moment. And so at ovulation, take 3-4 days off. Your brown fat's going to be fine. Your metabolism is going to be fine. And if you discover that you are pregnant, it is okay to wait a trimester, wait 2 trimesters before you get back into the cold. But
Yeah.
later in
I
your
think that's such
pregnancy,
an important context. And like when I've worked with fertility clients now, because I have over the last few years here, a lot of women in their 40s have come to me and they're like, I need, I want your help, coach me, help me do the ice baths and the diet and all the things, the light, mitochondrial health stuff that you teach me. And that's a big caveat. That's something that I always say that I probably could have got pregnant a month earlier if I had known this, because in December, I just did that 3 day a week plunge, but I did it all the way up through the end of the month. So I think that it could have impacted implantation because of that immune signaling, because what I didn't really appreciate back then is that, yes, for an egg to implant, you don't want your white blood cells elevated. Your body will see that embryo as more of a threat. And so that's what I did in January. I really cold plunged up until I got that positive ovulation sign. And then I said, okay, that's it. And I was like, I won't cold plunge again until if I get pregnant, I will wait. But if I'm not pregnant, then I'll wait until like cycle day 1 to do it again, or 2.
Yep.
And that's the month I ended up getting pregnant. So I always say I probably could have gotten pregnant a month sooner if I had known that little.
Yeah. But it is a good tip for women who are trying to replicate your results. You can keep this in mind. 3-4 days when you know you're ovulating, let your immune system back off. This is a foreign body that has yet to attach itself to you. And you don't want your immune system to get confused. But then what did you do with your cold therapy during your pregnancy?
I honestly didn't do any. But what I did do is I saved up for a Morosco Forge so that I would have one ready when my son was born. So when he was born, I had paid for my Morosco Forge and had installed it in my little shed because I fantasized about cold plunging during my pregnancy. I just didn't do it because I was a little bit nervous because I had so many losses. I was like, I just don't want to do any stressors during pregnancy. I probably could have and would have been fine, because I have a good friend of mine, Amy, who she cold plunged through both of her pregnancies, but I didn't. I will say, though, that it was a ridiculously easy labor. I mean, we almost didn't make it. I would have loved to have a home birth, but my husband is more kind of straight-laced and just wasn't comfortable with that. So I chose a center that's like an hour from here, that they won't force interventions on you. They won't make you get an IV or a Heplock. They have water births. It's like, it's similar to a birth center, but it's a hospital. So if you need interventions, they're there. But the caveat with that was that I was in labor that I almost gave birth in the car because it was an hour away.
Your water already broken when you were on the way to the birth center?
No, but I was in like hard labor. I'd lost the mucus plug, and I was in hard labor, and I felt him kind of like slide down when we were about a block away from the hospital. Yep. He was ready to go. And we got in the hospital and I was like, I want my water birth. And they were like, sorry, it's going to take an hour to fill up the tub. He's going to be born before we can get the tub filled up. So I'm sorry, no water birth. I was already 9.5 centimeters when I got there.
Good for you. My aunt, God rest her soul, is Penny Simpkin. She wrote a book called Pregnancy, Childbirth, and the Newborn. She founded an organization called Doulas of North America. So when my wife was pregnant, of course, I had to call my aunt. We went through doula training. I got her book. One of the things that she advises is that if you have the presence of mind to sort of check your makeup and repack your bag while you're in labor, you don't go to the hospital. You're not ready yet. You don't leave for the hospital until you feel desperate. Because the least, she advised that you want to spend the least amount of time in a medical setting. Labor is not a medical emergency. Something can develop into a medical emergency, but she's like, it's a healthy, normal state. Stay at home until you know for sure you're ready. And it sounds like, Sarah, you did that.
Yeah, I mean, I had the opposite experience with my daughter. I went in too soon, and then they ended up giving me Pitocin and inducing the whole thing, and it was horrible. I mean, it was horrible. And I wasn't able to get an epidural because the Pitocin kicked in so fast and they couldn't get an anesthesiologist. So it was like a Pitocin labor with no epidural. It was very uncomfortable. It was horrible. My son, everything totally natural, no epidural, obviously no Pitocin. Everything just happened on its own. And it was, I'm not going to say it was a walk in the park, but it was definitely easier than with my daughter. And the center that we chose, they let us go home the next day. That's one of their policies, is like, we're not going to keep you here. That's another reason I chose that center. If you're in Atlanta, it's North Fulton is the name of the hospital. It's only got 8 beds. So it's a small little hospital up in North Georgia, but they are better than most birth centers from what I've been told from kind of the other crunchy moms around here. Because the one thing I appreciated, and I don't know how I might turn off some of your listeners by saying this, but they came in the room because I gave them my birth plan when I walked in. I said,
Way to
no.
go. I'm glad you had a birth plan.
I had it written up. I said, I don't want an IV. I told them all the things I don't want. No eye ointment. He stays on the cord. No vaccines, nothing. And they were like, okay, no problem. They read it before we got through. And then they came in and they said, hey, do you want a circumcision? And I was like, no. And they were like, oh, thank God. We hate those. I was like, wow, interesting. So it was a very different hospital.
I don't have any memory of it. And I insisted that my son was not. I don't see the point. I decided for my son that he could make that decision when he was conscious, when he was able to, and that I wasn't going to make it for him. You had a birth plan, you said what you wanted, and circumcision was not on there. When I was doing a birth plan with my wife and my aunt, she challenged me. Because we said all the same things you said. We don't want this, we don't want that, we don't want this intervention. She said, okay, what would change your mind? And I'm like, oh, no, wait a second. We definitely don't want a C-section. There's nothing that's going to change our mind. And she said, well, hang on a second. And she put us through some scenarios. You don't want a fetal monitor. What would change your mind? She said. And she made me realize that a plan is not predestination. A plan is an intention. It's like you're setting a course and this is your ship, but sometimes the wind changes or the tide changes. You have to adapt. She prepared us for almost anything that could have happened. We'd already lived it in our imagination. We knew what we wanted when we were confronted with it. And instead of me, like some lame husband, asking my wife, who's in the throes of a contraction, well, do you want the epidural? I mean, she's incapable of deciding these things. She's busy. Her brain is working on something. She can't make these decisions. We'd made them ahead of time. And so I walked in there with all the confidence in the world. The disadvantage for us is that our children were born in New York State. And New York State is terrible in this regard. With our daughter, who came second, we left the hospital in less than 24 hours because she was great. She was born at like 5:30 in the morning. We had a little nap and we said, okay, we're ready to go. Now, we live practically across the street from the hospital in northern New York in this tiny little university town. Like if there'd been a problem, we would have walked right back. But we so angered the medical staff that they reported us to Child Protective Services for leaving the hospital too soon. And I said, you know what? We'll take the hit. They can come visit the home if they like. But we were getting out of there before all of these sort of mandatory interventions that the state would have imposed upon us. And I'll probably get a strike on YouTube for this entire episode. I'm just sharing my experience. None of these are recommendations. I'm saying this is what worked for me.
I think you always have to, informed consent is so important. And we're not really given that here in this country, or most places really. It's just like, you need this intervention. And we're never told the potential downsides of interventions or potential alternatives. That's what's so frustrating to me, is that I have people, oh, my doctor put me on this. My doctor put me on this. And it's like, well, they didn't discuss these other side effects or these other potential alternatives to try before going to that intervention. No, it was just, here you go. And, birth is a business. And, these hospitals, they're businesses. And that's what people don't realize, that they're there for life and death, acute situations. You break a bone, you're in a car accident, you can have your life saved.
And I'm
There's a
glad.
lot of
I'm glad
things.
urgent care is
Yeah.
there. I'm glad emergency care is there. I'm glad there are orthopedic surgeons in this
Yes.
country. Yeah.
Yes. And I'm not one of these people that thinks any doctor is out there intentionally trying to harm people. I don't think at the core of most of doctors that I've met over the last few years, especially since I've been doing this, I haven't met doctors with bad intentions. I think they all come with good intentions, but then there's this whole system that ties their hands and that creates all these stipulations to what they can and can't do. And it's just a system that sets everybody up to fail, unfortunately, including the doctors. And so it's, a popular thing to just demonize doctors and say this, that, and the other. But I think we have to look at the whole picture. And when we look at the hospital system and the birth system, when you understand it's a business, and when you understand this is their protocol, this is what they're going to do to everyone, but I have the opportunity and the choice to opt out and to not participate legally, then, I'm going to exercise my right to decline certain things, and assume those risks.
Your doctor didn't put you on a statin. Your doctor didn't put you on blood pressure medication. You did. Your doctor
Mm-hmm.
gave you an opportunity or a recommendation, and it is the patient that is responsible for what they put into their body. Thank goodness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I think that's the attitude we have to take on
And
instead of going
support.
into victim. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more about late in your pregnancy. There are a number of things that are very common for women. They will get swollen ankles, for example. They will have trouble sleeping. They'll have difficulty walking and staying active. And sometimes what happens either in their family or even with their gynecologist, they will prescribe rest. They'll say,
Mm-hmm.
you're about 8 months and you should rest. You should start some of your maternity leave if they're working early, and you should get more rest. Now, I'm not saying that these symptoms are healthy. I'm not saying they should even be considered normal, but they have been normalized because so
Mm-hmm.
many women go through them.
Mm-hmm.
How was the last couple of months of your pregnancy with your son?
Good. I enjoyed being pregnant. I probably looked like a beach whale because I would lay out on my on my deck sunbathing up until the very last day. So my doctor was like, "How are you so tan? Are you going to a tanning bed?" I'm like, "Nope,
Ooh,
just laying out in the sun." Um, and so yeah, I mean, I was sunbathing, I was walking, swimming, active, sleeping just fine, and it was I feel like I got lucky in a lot of ways. Like I feel like I could have had 10 more kids. Like my body's just built for pregnancy, um and childbearing. But it is what it is. I've got the two that I have and I'm grateful for it. But yeah, pregnancy was great. I loved it. I enjoyed every minute of it, really, other than every now and then I would just be like, is he okay? I'm checking to make sure, is
of
he
course.
still kicking and all that stuff. But really, health wise, it was fantastic.
What were you eating when you were pregnant? Because you told us that you experimented with carnivore, and I'll tell you what my
Mhm.
wife did with our son after we hear more from you.
Yeah. So before I was able to get pregnant, I transitioned my diet to more of a seasonal approach. So I did bring in like carbohydrates that were like potatoes, apples, fruits, vegetables, those sorts of things, and just kind of mixed it up. And I would interlace some keto in there. So I would still have some periods where I would do a little bit of keto. I would see if I could get into ketosis. Then I would just come out and be in a more seasonal approach. So that was before pregnancy. So I wasn't in ketosis when I went into pregnancy. So I didn't do a ketogenic approach during pregnancy. What I did do was I made sure to prioritize high quality animal protein, lots of eggs. So I did some organ meats as well. I did salmon roe. Everyone's like, where do you get your salmon roe from? I'm like, it's a ridiculously expensive thing that I do for the family, but it's called a restaurant called Caviar Roost. They're in New York and Miami, and I would buy the tins and just have them shipped and do a spoonful of that 5 days a
Practical
week.
medicine. Yep.
Yeah. And my son, that was one of his first foods was the salmon roe.
Yep.
He calls it candy. Now he's 3. He calls it his candy. So crazy. I want more candy. I'm like, okay. And he'll take the tin and just eat out of it. I'm like, that's so
Yeah,
expensive.
that ain't no licorice, son.
Oh my gosh, it's so expensive, but okay, this is good for your brain. But, I just really focused on nutrient density. And I did allow myself to have, like, again, potatoes, fruits, those sorts of things. And I didn't force myself to do ketosis. And to lose the weight after pregnancy, I did really the same thing. I did a lot of the principles that I teach in my leptin program of the seasonal foods approach, prioritize protein, and then I layered on a little bit of fasting when it's appropriate. When the body has those signals back on board, the leptin signal is really working the way it should, and you're getting what you need, you've got enough nutrients on board, you can throw a little bit of fasting in there, and the body does beautifully with it. So that's the approach I still follow. And I'm actually I would say about 30 pounds leaner now than I was before I even got pregnant, which is crazy because I'll be 47 in June. So blue blockers are a highly debated topic in the alternative wellness world. There are a lot of people that say that they don't work and that they're pointless and useless. And I have to agree with that because there are some brands that are pointless, useless, and don't work. When you test them with a spectrometer, they do not block the spectrums of light that they need to block in order to protect your circadian rhythm. So you've got these glasses that are promising to give you a health benefit that don't. So I will agree with some of those people on that point, but I will disagree in that the research is extremely clear when you look at the spectrum of light that sets the brain up to say, hey, it's daytime. We don't want to have that coming into the eye at night. Viva Rays is the brand I have used and trusted for the last 4 years, actually almost 5 years now, to protect my circadian rhythm because they block the spectrum of light that they actually say they do, the meaningful spectrum of light that signals to the brain that it's daytime. I've tested this personally with a spectrometer, and it's the brand I recommend to clients as well. So if you're looking to upgrade your health this year and get a high quality pair of blue blockers, check out Viva Rays. You can use code YOGI to get extra savings. There's a link down in the show notes. And thank you to Viva Rays for sponsoring today's episode.
It sounds like it's working great for you. Not surprised. Pregnancy is a state of physiological insulin resistance. So, I mean, physiological rather than pathological. Pathological insulin resistance will lead to type 2 diabetes, or in the case of pregnancy, gestational diabetes. But there's so much growth hormone in a healthy woman that it will interfere with the action of insulin. And this is fine during pregnancy. Puberty is another state of physiological insulin resistance. And it's Ben Bickman who taught me this. He's probably the world's most famous insulin expert. And he's the one who is most cautious about hyperinsulinemia. And he's saying, look, puberty, pregnancy, it's physiological. But many of the symptoms that women report late in their pregnancy, so this is last trimester, are indications of metabolic dysfunction. This is when the physiological insulin resistance has begun to become pathological. And the clinical tests, like a glucose tolerance test, that are insensitive to what's going on with a woman's metabolism when she's pregnant. That is, these tests were not devised to detect metabolic irregularities during pregnancy. They were devised for diagnosing people who are type 2 diabetic, way down the road of insulin resistance. So when the ankles get swollen and the sleep disturbances start to show up and the lethargy kicks in, rest is not the answer. The women who have reported to me will get into the ice bath. They'll do just 2 or 3 minutes. And their doctors, their gynecologists are like, look, it's fine. Your baby is so well insulated from the cold water. Do not concern yourself that you're going to somehow give your baby hypothermia because you've been in the ice bath for 2 or 3 minutes. They get a reduction in inflammation. They get a boost in mitochondrial function. They fix some of that insulin resistance. They become more insulin sensitive, and they sleep a lot better. So instead of winding up with preeclampsia or gestational diabetes, their pregnancies go longer. They have better birth outcomes. And there's some good epidemiological data on how bad heat is during pregnancy and how healthy brief or acute cold exposure can be. It's a good time to interject. You might not have been into sauna at the time, but you were living in Georgia. Heat is a terrible thing for men, who are trying to conceive, but also women who are pregnant. So get the heck out of the sauna if you're carrying a baby or you're trying to conceive.
Yeah, I did not do, I have a sauna now, but I didn't have one before pregnancy. And I did do sauna a lot after the IVF because I wanted to clear all those hormones out of my body. So I did strategic like castor oil packs. I did sauna with binders. I did want to try to pull as much of the IVF drugs out of my body as humanly possible. So that was the utilization of sauna for me. But then it was eventually we were good with sauna, did enough of that detoxing and went into the cold. And I think that was helpful. So I do sauna now, but yeah, when I have women who love the sauna and they're trying to get pregnant, I'm like, we need to back down on that. Yeah.
It's fine after the birth. It's fine for breastfeeding. So is ice bath, by the way. Some people are worried that the vasoconstriction of the ice bath.
No, I jumped right in.
Way to go. Did you experience any difficulties with your milk coming in?
No. Everything was just totally fine with that. Fine.
We hear this a lot. My wife has an older son. Before we met, she was pregnant at what's now considered a young age, 22. And she did suffer from preeclampsia with her first. And one of the things that my aunt was really good about was prioritizing protein while she's pregnant. My aunt said, look, you're trying to build a new human being. It takes a lot of protein. One of the things that was overlooked, and I'm not blaming Penny Simkin for this or anyone, but I learned this from Stephen Cunnane later. The brain is built from fat. In particular, there are certain fats like DHA from which the brain must be constructed. And so prioritizing protein is good advice for a woman who was eating too many carbs, tipped over into pathological insulin resistance, suffered from preeclampsia, and now is pregnant again. That was the situation with my wife. She was counting the grams of protein so that when we left our Bradley method class and we went to Wendy's and she had, the triple cheeseburger, which can be healthy. And she said, I haven't hit my target. I said, I'm going to go get you a fish sandwich. I mean, she was packing the protein in. What we didn't know was what Stephen Cunnane taught me. We needed those animal fats, the fish oils. We needed the sources of DHA that cannot be found in seed oils. And thank goodness our son was very healthy. He's very smart. He's neurologically, well developed. But if I could do it over again, I would have done like the salmon roe that you're talking about. I would have found those sources of the omega-3 fatty acids from which the brain is built. It's not just about prioritizing protein, it's about prioritizing the right fat. And it sounds like you're doing this now too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We're doing it all around. I mean, we've been trying to figure out diet and have healthy diet here just because of my daughter as well, because she has struggled a lot with her health over the years. And so for her and for all of us, I kind of have basics that we all follow with our drinking water, with our minerals, with the salmon roe, with taking some body bio-PC for cell membrane health. There's basic things that I do for everyone in the family. And, we all see the benefits from it. We all are healthier for it. And my husband is leaner than he's ever been. And, he's doing really well as well. So we were both a little bit overweight for a lot of our marriage. And since I've been on this kick the last 6 years or so, his health is also a lot better as well.
Will you Um, Tell us a little bit then about your understanding of the difference between carnivore and
Mm-hmm.
keto. Because when
Oh,
we're on
yeah.
the topic of fat, um, carnivore doesn't necessarily put you in ketosis if you're
Mm-hmm.
getting too much protein, not enough fat. So
Mm-hmm.
tell us now about what your understanding is like.
Yeah, I mean, that is absolutely spot on, is that you're not, and I learned that when I was doing carnivore, that I really wasn't, because I had a blood ketone meter and a glucometer, and I would test, and my blood sugars would run in the 90s, sometimes low 100s, and I was really had very low ketones when I was doing carnivore the standard carnivore way. Then I mean, I did all kinds of iterations of carnivore in the 2 years, just trying to make it work. And so I did go through a period where I took the protein level down a little bit, took the fat way up to make like very good ketones and get the blood sugar down low. Unfortunately, I ended up gaining a good amount of weight from that strategy, which I see happen with women. Some women go with this deep ketosis, carnivore approach. They lose weight. A lot of women, especially the women that come to me, do that and they end up gaining weight because the satiety factor isn't necessarily there because you're just kind of like you're eating a smaller volume of food. And genetically,
True.
people have different types of receptors in their gut. So some people actually are going to do better if there's some fiber in their diet, and they're going to do very poorly if they're eating a lower volume. Even though the energy requirements are being met, the body doesn't necessarily feel satisfied. So I ended up gaining a good amount of weight doing this like high fat carnivore approach. And then I was just kind of like, all right, I don't know what else to do. I'm trying to get pregnant, so I'm not going to try to lose any weight at that point. And I just try to keep doing the whole carnivore thing, and I had this extra weight. And then it wasn't until I really got deep into changing to a more seasonal approach and understanding leptin and how to become more sensitive to leptin that the weight came off without me even dieting, which was pretty cool. So I think you have to find an approach that works the best for your body. But carnivore, to go back to your original question, a lot of times is not by default ketosis or ketogenic. And ketosis or ketogenic diet is not by default a weight loss strategy for everyone. It can be, but it's not as black and white as some people would have you to believe. Okay, collagen. And I say this as someone who was extremely skeptical. I've been using it for about 6 months now. I didn't really start it for skin or hair. I started because I was noticing some early joint discomfort last summer, which I suspect was tied to just getting a little bit older and stress levels increasing. Honestly, I've been very surprised. I've actually noticed real improvements in joint comfort, especially with training and day-to-day movement. Now, from a science standpoint, as we age, collagen in our skin and connective tissue declines. Human studies suggest that hydrolyzed collagen peptides, when used consistently, may support joint comfort and lead to modest improvements in skin hydration and elasticity, with some studies actually showing a reduction in the appearance of fine lines after about 8 to 12 weeks. The blend I've been using also includes eggshell membrane, which has human data supporting joint stiffness and mobility. Just keep in mind, collagen is not a magic wand. It works best alongside enough protein and the basics like sleep and recovery. But if you'd like to try the collagen I've been using, go to www.organifi.com/Sarah K and use the code Sarah K for 20% off your order. Again, that's www.organifi.com/Sarah K.
I really admire what Sean Baker's doing. I admire his physique. I admire the way he approaches his life. He's doing great. He's the carnivore doctor. On the other hand, I think Mike Mutzel's pretty great too, and he's the one making sourdough pancakes. He makes a delicious loaf of bread. The seasonal approach is the one that makes the most sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Yeah.
not going to eat those blueberries that are flown in from Argentina in January in Phoenix. But do you think that my grandmother would have turned them down during the summer in Maine? Of course, they're like, it's appropriate to the light environment that I'm in,
Mm-hmm.
to the thermal environment that I'm in. And
Yep.
especially if you consider that you live in sort of an ancestral area. Maine is great for white people like me, to put it impolitely. The desert is a little bit more of a challenge, and I have to think about what kind of environment am I in, light and thermally, and what grows here? What should I be eating? So it sounds like you and I have settled into the same kind of seasonal approach, which is also very satisfying from a culinary perspective. We get variety. We get to enjoy things when they're fresh, when they're ready for us.
Yeah, I mean, try to tell me in the middle of the summer I can't have a peach when I'm living in Georgia. That's not going to be a fun conversation.
For me, it's pumpkin pie in the fall. That is my
Oh,
downfall.
yeah, I gotta have that too. That's good stuff. Yeah. I mean, and like I said, I'm leaner now at 46, almost 47, than I was when I was constantly trying to adhere to carnivore, to keto, to a diet, like this approach. I was trying to do it all the time. And what I've found for myself, and then just literally with hundreds of students, people who come through my programs and are in my membership community, it's the same. It's the same for a lot of them, that, you know, they've just gone through these regimented programs and it's ended up causing a rebound effect. And they're kind of just left feeling restricted and a little bit depressed. And then we go to a more seasonal approach. We look at prioritizing the protein, making sure they're getting enough carbohydrates, the right amounts of fat, really balancing out their nutrition and adding in that seasonal layer. And they do well. They lose the weight, they feel better, and they're not constantly feeling deprived all the time. So I'm convinced it's not about always being ketosis or always being in, you know, the glucose state. It's about metabolic flexibility, and as about variation. That's how I see people thrive a lot more.
You did something else that was really smart when you were pregnant with your son. You said that you were whole body sun tanning, that you walked into your doctor's office and accused you of using a tanning bed, which, by the way, we should interject. Tanning beds, terrible. All of the research that looks at UVB in isolation and says, oh, UVB is so dangerous, is a bunch of nonsense. That doesn't apply to the sunshine. It only applies to tanning beds, because the infrared part of the spectrum protects your skin and your body from the damage of the UV part of the spectrum. So what you were doing was making and storing vitamin D. Did you know that at the time?
Oh, yes, because I had interviewed Jim Stevenson Jr. before my pregnancy. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work, but he kind of takes apart a lot of the vitamin D research and talks about the downside of, you know, high dose vitamin D supplementation. And so I had gone into my pregnancy kind of like, I'm not going to do a lot of this high dose supplementation. And so I had been really aware of naturally keeping my vitamin D levels up. And I monitored those with my midwife to, you know, make sure that we were in a healthy range without adding any supplements. And it ended up, you know, going really well. And it was funny. She was like, yeah, I used to work down in Africa and we didn't have any painkillers. And so people would just go lay out on rocks instead of having a painkiller when they were in pain. She's like, so I bet that's helping you get through the pregnancy. I'm like, well, I'm not really in any pain, but it does feel really good.
I'm not a fan of supplements. I mean, if you have rickets, take supplements. If you're in acute deficiency, take supplements. But you mentioned Jack Cruz. He's got this pithy phrase that I like. If your body can make it, you don't need to take it. Vitamin D metabolism is so complex that you cannot rely exclusively on a blood serum measure or on a pharmaceutical supplement to get yourself into healthy vitamin D status. The sunshine is best.
Yeah.
And
it
turns out
so many things that vitamin D supplementation, they can impact your magnesium status. And most people are low on magnesium to begin with. A lot of people don't take K2 with them. I did a post on my Substack recently where they showed, and people got really mad because it was MS patients. And they're like, well, show us with a normal population. I'm like, well, this is how studies work. We have some human data to show that this is an effect that can happen. But in this particular study, these patients were given, I believe it was 4,000 IUs of vitamin D per day.
A
And
day.
at the end of 90 days, their melatonin metabolites had dropped significantly. And so there's
Why
a,
wouldn't?
you know, there's always some sort of a reaction in the body when we are trying to just piecemeal something in that we're low on. The body's going to have some other compensation mechanism a lot of the time. And so, yeah, people got really mad at me about that, and they were screaming about how much they love their vitamin D supplements. And I'm like, you can do whatever you like. I'm just kind of
Yeah, if it works for
showing this
them, great.
information to
No,
you,
thank you.
you know?
MS patients are a really informed, a super important cohort to work with. MS, is multiple sclerosis, is an autoimmune disorder. So is type 1 diabetes. I didn't know a dang thing about vitamin D, and I had to learn it after my son's diagnosis. A baby is born without a mature immune system. It's really relying upon its mother's microbiome and in her breast milk for any immunity. But that immune system develops rapidly in the first year of life, and it relies upon vitamin D for good, healthy immune system development. So this longitudinal study in Finland was tracking infants and their mothers and discovered that type 1 diabetes is associated with vitamin D deficiencies during late stage pregnancy in the first year of life. And I'm going, of
These guys
course
are
it
up there in
is.
New York, and
He was born
yeah.
in late October. I didn't know anything about anything. I should have stripped that kid down and taken him out into the cold. I should have activated his brown fat, made his mitochondria make that light inside his body so they convert cholesterol into pre-vitamin D, which I only know now.
Yeah.
If I had known, I would have done better for my son's vitamin D status. It would have hopefully regulated his immune system so he doesn't wind up with an autoimmune disorder. All autoimmune disorders are associated with aberrant vitamin D metabolism. And so it's no wonder these scientists said, let's give the MS patients a bunch of vitamin D and see if that works. That
Yeah.
is not the way to fix vitamin D, but it's a hypothesis that I can understand why they're trying.
Yeah.
You were getting the
Have you
sunshine.
heard of Dr. Richard Weller and his work?
I think I've heard the name, but I've never met the man.
Listen, I'm
Tell
going to
me
try
about
to
it.
get him on my podcast at some point, but I've been listening to his presentations he's done for the Guy Foundation. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating about UV light, vitamin D, how all these vitamin D studies are basically not showing any sort of a benefit for things like MS or cardiovascular disease, bone fractures. He's really laid this out well, but he's done some really interesting studies on UV light.
Mhm.
So I'm working on a longer Substack article to go through all this about UV light, the negatives, positives, how someone could use it potentially, but his work is just really groundbreaking, and he's a dermatologist who's speaking
Wonderful.
about the benefits of UV light. So if you want a good talk, I would listen to his, it's on the Guy Foundation's YouTube channel, Dr. Richard Weller. Really,
I'll
really
go find it.
fascinating stuff. Yeah.
So now we know some things that we didn't know when your daughter was born or when
Mm-hmm.
my son was born. We know that it is mitochondria that steer neurological development.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good thing to know because the whole brain and nervous system relies upon mitochondria to develop it in the fetus and in the child's first 3 years of life so that it's healthy. We now know that vitamin D is essential for the healthy development of the immune system. Good Lord, we thought what you needed for a healthy immune system was to get shot up with a Hep B vaccine at birth or something like
Right.
that. How wrong we could possibly have been.
Yeah.
Are there any other things that you've learned sort of in the last 25 years of being a mom that you can pass on to our audience, which is curious about ice baths, but no longer naive about the kind of advice they're getting from centralized medicine?
Yeah. I mean, so much, but I think one thing that often gets overlooked, and I've dealt with this with a lot of fertility clients, is the role that your nervous system and just really coherence plays in the whole scape of things, because my son, my daughter ended up having some crazy health issues after my son was born, and we moved into this house. It was really a bit of a disaster. I've talked about it on my channels before. And my son, the little baby, he's like, I don't know what to do about this. He ended up developing eczema, which we have
Mhm.
eradicated, and he's doing phenomenal now. But we did a lot of this like functional testing. Is it yeast? Is it this? Is it that? Is it that? No, 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 no. And it really, the only possible explanation is that it was his nervous system reacting to his sister having grand mal seizures and being in the ICU, and him being a little baby, not being able to do anything about it. So, and that's something I couldn't have controlled that. I try not to beat myself up over it or feel bad, but that is one of those situations where we have to also look at how the nervous system can override perfect diet and perfect all the things sometimes, because the body is in a state of threat. And so, we've done our best to get both of them doing a heck of a lot better now. But that's one thing that I think when we're in the health community, we do the ice plunge and we do the diet and we do the protocol and we do check off all the boxes. But if we're in a stressed out, panicked state over it, and the attitude that we have about our health is one of like, just pushing and stress, right? Then you can kind of wreck the whole ship. So you have to go into a state of acceptance as the best if you can, and really, look at your health through that lens of like best possible case scenario, instead of stressing about all the things that you don't want to happen or that could happen. Always envision yourself in that healthy, healed state. Because that was the one thing that I think was the kicker that allowed me to get pregnant with my son, is that I began visualizing every night before bed. I would sit in bed and I would hold a baby and I would imagine it was my son, and I would allow all those feelings to come over me of how wonderful it was going to be to hold this baby. I was doing all the process, right? But I think that was the final piece, and then we learned the lesson about nervous system down the road. So that's something I think that you can't overlook. And that's sometimes why I think you see people that are just like doing everything wrong. You're like, how are they getting away with that? But they're just like so genuinely happy, and they're in this like bliss state that somehow it overrides, some of these things that are maybe not so healthy that they're doing. So we think that we know everything about health, but there's more to the story than getting it all perfect.
There's two aspects. One is a couple who's trying to conceive cannot help. It's very normal for them to compare themselves to other couples and say, well, it's so easy for them. She drinks like a fish. How did, or do whatever it is. And these sort of like imaginary moral judgments creep in because they may be experiencing grief. Like, because they don't, every stick you pee on that doesn't come up positive is like sort of a redoubling of the loss of an imagined future.
Yes.
It's very difficult to deal with. And so we can cut them some slack. We know that comparison is the thief of joy, and yet it's a very normal thing for human beings to do it.
Yeah.
So this is one. The other thing is that adults can learn coping strategies for this sort of self-soothing or this nervous system regulation. But we often lose track of how our kids are doing, because kids seem like, they're fine. They might have some short-lived sort of dysregulation and then appear to us bounce back. But they don't have the same coping strategies. They haven't been taught the same things that the grown-ups do. When my son was diagnosed, he became the central focus of our attention. And for his older brother, we weren't so worried. His older brother, he's got his own life. He's got his own friends because they're 8 years apart. But his younger sister, who was 3, we were worried that she would feel left out or neglected. I don't know if we did the right thing or the wrong thing, but one of the things that we did was involve her in his care, in particular in emergencies. If I dosed him with too much insulin, his blood sugar would drop. He would become hypoglycemic. Brain fog would set in. He'd lose his, sense of coordination, and it could be very dangerous. We put juice boxes all over the house because if you overdose a type 1 diabetic child, the antidote here is liquid carbs, and that will counteract the action of the insulin and bring his blood sugar back up. We told my daughter Emma where all the juice boxes were, and we held emergency juice box rehearsals where she knew how to run to the nearest one and get them. Now, we have only activated the emergency juice box protocol like twice, but she swears to this day, she's 27 years old, that she's been scarred for life, that if she hears the word juice box, she'll be scrambling in all directions to try and find one. Maybe what we did wasn't the right thing to do. Maybe I was just doing this for my own sort of peace of mind. I think that one of the things it did for her was give her the sense of being involved, that there's something she can do. Children are so often powerless in their own lives, whether it's over their health or their nervous system state or whatever their ambitions are, at their tender age. And one of the things that grown-ups learn is regaining a sense of control will help take them out of that sympathetic, fight or flight activation. And I wanted my daughter to have something that she could do when she knew her parents were scared. Now she's contributing, Was there something that you've done with your son that engages him in the care of his older sister?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like they have a little psychic connection between the two of him, and he's only 3, but when she runs out of food, they're eating dinner together and she runs out of food, he'll say, "Mommy's sister needs more food." Whenever he is going to get something, he wants to make sure she has one too. Like if he's getting an apple, he wants to get one for sister, and he's very tuned in, and I feel like he knows that she's very different than everyone else, but it's so we'll see. I'm hoping that we're raising a very empathetic, kind boy. That's what my hope and my pray is, that he will be someone that's needed in this world, as there are more and more people like my daughter, children like my daughter out there, that he will be an ally and maybe somebody that is standing up for these kids and helping out in some way. But at the same time, I'm also giving him the freedom of, if he doesn't want to do that with his life, if he wants to go off and be an athlete or whatever, there's no pressure for that. But I do have a little hope that him being raised in this environment with a sister of this way, that he'll kind of view the world a bit differently than most people. So we'll see what happens.
Sarah, thanks for sharing your story. I hope that your experiences are going to encourage other people to do their reading, to get the pregnancy, childbirth, and the newborn book, to make their birth plans, to fix their metabolism, to seek alternative medical or clinical teams when they do become pregnant, so they don't wind up trapped in the centralized baby-making business as a profit center. There are so many things that people seeking to conceive or start a family or grow a family really need to know. And I think the most important one right now is 41 ain't old. 41 isn't geriatric. 41 isn't mean that you are instantly a candidate for IVF. There are a lot of things that you can do to restore your mitochondrial function, restore your metabolism, and restore your fertility.
Yep. The oldest client I've had so far had a healthy baby boy at age 47, 100% naturally. It's the oldest so far, but it's possible. Now I'm going to be 47 this summer, and I do not want to have, I'm good on babies, but, just to put that out there for anyone who's feeling that it's too late or that they're beyond repair, there is always something that you can do, in my opinion.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me here.